Okay.
All right, great. Well, thanks everyone for coming. Welcome to the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord Q&A. We have a special guest today, Paul Vanderklay, who I think most of our members are probably familiar with, but I'll give a brief introduction. Paul is a pastor, a minister with the Christian Reformed Church of North America. His church is in Sacramento, California. He rose to prominence in our community, to this community, starting with his YouTube channel and his videos surrounding Jordan Peterson, and that sort of ballooned, and his channel has exploded into this channel where he just has a plethora of amazing conversations with various guests. And one of his frequent talking companions is John Vervecchi. And so these two have formed a friendship, seems, and have some amazing conversations that probably people here are familiar with, both on Paul's channel and on John's channel. So, and Paul has been kind enough to come here today. So thank you, Paul, for being here. We really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
So maybe you can just start off by telling us just a little bit about yourself and about yourself and your channel and your work, and how you met John and the relationship you two have developed over time.
Okay. Well, I've been a minister in the Christian Reformed Church for a few decades now. I started off being, my father and my grandfather were both ministers in the Christian Reformed Church. After college and seminary, my first post was in the Dominican Republic doing missionary work, and then after that I came to Sacramento, California, and I've been here for, it'll be 23 years this August. About 3-ish years ago, I began to notice the work of Jordan Peterson, and more like 4 years ago now. Now 3. And I became interested in him. I had always used a blog as sort of a conversation partner. I'm a solo pastor of a small church, and so finding people to talk about the kinds of things I'm interested in wasn't always easy. So via a blog and listservs and some other groups, I would always look for conversation partners. And then when Jordan Peterson arose, there were a lot of interesting things about his work that I wanted to talk about. I had difficulty getting a lot of other pastors interested in talking about it. And I was also reading Neil Postman at that time, thinking about his book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, and thinking about the medium of YouTube. And so I decided to make a YouTube video. And whereas I had blogged for years, and my blog would usually get maybe 200 or 300 hits a day, and that was the entire blog. I began getting more traffic to my YouTube channel, and then because I'm a pastor, people wanted to talk to me, and one thing would lead to another. I found that sharing some of these conversations when appropriate was helpful for people, and the conversation just continued to bloom. Well, along the way, and he's in the chat, I noticed here, I can never quite say his name right, Strawn, was one of the people that was listening to me, and he would send me emails, and he would send me these cut and paste these long sections from Wikipedia about this philosopher, that philosopher, and he was really working hard to colonize me. And he said, well, there's this guy, this other professor at University of Toronto who has some videos, and you really have to watch his videos. And so that was John. And okay. But a lot of people send me videos, and so it's always hard to know what's going to sort of get to the top of the salience hierarchy. But I watched some of them, and the sound was kind of annoyingly bad, which I really don't have reason to point fingers at. There's bad sound in plenty of my videos. But there was enough there that really caught my interest, and I had used him a couple of times in some of my videos, trying to feel out who he is. I had a very low resolution idea of who he was. And then he started doing Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, where the sound was, for the most part, very good. And he was laying out things in a systematic form. And I began following him in a more disciplined way and really discovered some really helpful ideas and terminology, just helped me understand philosophy better and figure out what cognitive science was, learn all of this stuff better. And then John, I noticed had made some comments in some of the videos that I had commented on him, and he had sent me an email and said, I'd love to do a conversation. And I said that'd be great. And so that sort of has continued on. And yeah, friendship, as he often says, I have a lot of affection for Paul. Well, I have a lot of affection for John, and we haven't been able to meet in person yet. We've chatted online and we chatted via email. So i'm I'm fearful that the much anticipated conference coming up in planned for Thunder Valley, that's a casino here, Thunder Bay, Ontario, where myself and Jonathan Peugeot and John Vervaeke could all get together and have a conversation. I fear because of COVID that might not happen, but I very much, Lord willing, anticipate meeting John in person at some point, and hopefully our friendship over the years can deepen. I owe him a tremendous debt. The longer I sit with his work, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, the more I'm impressed by it, the deeper my learning comes. One of the things that you quickly realize as you open up your circles to a bigger vein like YouTube, there are a lot of smart people out there, and I'm not necessarily at the top of the hierarchy, and ideas take time to sink in. It's fairly difficult to colonize a 50-something-year-old man, and so the ideas sink in, and through my monologue videos, you can tell how he keeps coming up. And as he's often said, one of the things he did with Awakening from the Meaning Crisis is he, at least in this little corner of the internet, has helped standardize a degree of language and given me some base tools with which to continue to pursue my work, his 4 Ps. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about cognitive science and, um, uh, dealing with problems, what problems are, why we have them. So lots of things. And so I've benefited tremendously from John's work, and I'm very excited about, continuing to have personal conversations with him. And he's extremely generous with his engagement, and so it's just been a joy. And so I was really thrilled to see this Discord server after learning about that because of the guys over at Bridges of Meaning. And so coming here today is just a pleasure.
Great. So we definitely owe thanks to Strawn for introducing you to John. And by the way, Nick B is one of the moderators on your Bridges of Meaning server, helped coordinate this meeting today. So thank you, Nick, for that. I'll just throw out one last question. So you're a Christian pastor, and John is a non-theist who's talking about creating the religion that's not a religion, and so that makes it an interesting contrast. What are your feelings about, what are your thoughts about the religion that's not a religion, and how do you what do you think of it? How do you integrate it into your thinking? And how do you is there a conflict there between do you have any conflicting thoughts about it?
Well, I think Mary Cohen, who runs a channel, for a while she was a Jehovah's Witness, and she became a Roman Catholic. Very smart woman who is doing some videos on Joseph Ratzinger and chickens and a bunch of other things. I think in she's had a number of conversations with John as well as J.P. Marceau, who was a friend of Jonathan Peugeot and quite active in his community. He's a panpsychist and a Roman Catholic, And so for me, my vistas have simply been broadened by all of this interchange. Now, before we started the thing and we got together and you called John an atheist, I sort of tried to gently correct you. He's a non-theist, and I think a lot of what's been helpful about John's work, he's upped the resolution on our conversations, and a non and through my 2 3 years, my whole project has just really been a learning project for me, and I've gotten better acquainted with some of the philosophical history, with Christian theology. It's interesting to me the amount of distance between John's non-theism, especially with his interest and knowledge of Neoplatonism, of Augustine, versus my theism. That gap might not be as small as it might not be as large as we think. It's and a lot of my conversations with John, and in fact, a video I'm planning to make this afternoon, probably post it tomorrow, has a lot to do with this idea of person. What is a person? And Strawn can, of course, talk a lot about that. But in a lot of ways, the theism non-theism gets down to this question of personhood and what's the nature of the universe. Where does consciousness fit in? Now, John's religion, that's not a religion, I think, is a recognition that throughout history, religious structures and practices and communities and perspectives have afforded tremendous amounts of suffering that have helped people in a sort of Jordan Petersonian way, um, endure the sufferings of life in this world. And whereas, one of the biggest differences, let's say, between John's perspective and, let's say, the other little side of the bisection of our little corner of the internet, say that where Jonathan Peugeot and I reside, is that John is skeptical that the ecologies of practice and the community structures and the worldviews and the philosophy of Christianity can continue to, um, let's say, not just endure or face a declining, retreating posture in the corners of culture, but can in fact energize and continue to be vital and going into the future. And I completely understand John's perspective on this, because there have been many ways in which the last 200 or so years, certain aspects of Christianity have been under crisis, stressed, retreating. Sometimes this is phrased, as Charles Taylor does, as a subtraction story. That and John is sophisticated enough and honest enough not to, pull any fast moves or low blows or cheap shots. And one of the things that you immediately begin to see if you interact with John is he is a man of integrity, and he does have conversations in good faith, and his whole project centers around the idea that people with differences of opinions can have a dialogos with each other. See, I'm using these fancy Vervaeke words, as Job calls them. Can have a dialogos with each other and both come away from the conversation better for it, even if a significant aspect of their disagreement, let's say theism versus non-theism, endures. And so in John, I have found just a wonderful conversation partner and teacher who has showed me so much. And so as Mary Cohen said, hey, would I like people to come to Christianity and use Christian practices and worldview and theology? Absolutely. That's part of my profession. It's part of my tradition. It's part of my creed. But I recognize that, at least in the short term, that's probably not going to happen. And will people find rest for their souls in some of the practices and communities and ecology of practices that he is promoting, well, it's not in my power to stop that, and I don't have an interest in stopping it. And so let's continue the dialogue and let's continue the conversation. And again, I thought Mary, who is nobody's going to question her credentials as a bona fide conservative Roman Catholic, she says, hey, if people are getting helped by this, okay. And I agree with Mary. So we'll have some differences, but I'm I'm very interested in the project, and I want to continue to follow along and be in community with people who are pursuing his project, so we can continue to learn together.
That's excellent, and I should say, the focus on communication, I think, is critical, and it's one of my focuses too. The ability of people with different beliefs and backgrounds to communicate with each other, to engage one another, to understand one another, and treat each other respectfully and civilly while still disagreeing. I think that's key, and I think your talk certainly exemplify that. So thank you for that. So I'd like to open it up to some questions now. Just please note we are recording this session, and there is an Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord YouTube channel, and so the next day or so we will be uploading this to that. I think so. My name's Brett. Pleasure of Doubt. Maybe if when you ask a question, you could, because it's audio only, you could state your name. I don't think we've been doing that, but that probably makes for a better listening experience for people. So if you could state your name when you ask your question. So who has a question for Paul?
Hi, Paul.
Hey, Strawn, how are you?
I'm good, and you?
I'm doing fine.
Okay, so my question for you is, are you going to join the server? This could be an excellent opportunity for you to pick up some unwitting Christian.
Strawn and I have talked a lot, actually. We should let people know that I'm glad that
I'm being mischievous.
I'm glad that he's more active now. For a long time, I encouraged him. I said, you got to get out there. You've got a lot to contribute. So I'm really pleased to see you pursuing this. So anyway, go ahead. I'm just trying to derail your question because you're probably going to ask me a stumper. So go right ahead.
No, I thought I already did. Are you going to join the server and pick up some unwitting Christians?
Oh, that's my question. I did join the server. I haven't participated in it much. That's just been sort of a matter of both economy of time and salience hierarchy. I owe a debt, I think, to the Bridges of Meaning server, and so that tends to be where I hang out more. But I haven't really spent a lot of time here to sort of poke around, and I don't find Discord to be a terribly easy interface. And so we've been taught. I do a Friday question and answer over at the at Bridges of Meaning, and we've talked about a wiki or do some other things to try to organize some of this so that when people come in, they can have something. What part of why I like and then growing an appreciation for the Discord servers is that they do tend to facilitate community in a cyber way, that if the culture is healthy, people sort of begin by, they might see me on YouTube, they might watch a video, they might want a level of community, and I want there to be a place where they can go. Now, as a Christian pastor, in this practice, in meet space, there's a church. And so if I meet somebody and we have a good conversation, I can say, well, you can come to my church and meet more people. Now, since the Jordan Peterson thing, I'll say, come to my local meetup. And I've been trying to help other meetups start here on the West Coast and in the United States and Canada. But of course, COVID has sort of put a damper on that for now. So yes, but it all depends on time. So that's sort of where I'm at.
Yeah, I will say we've also put quite a bit of thought into how we can arrange this Discord server so that it functions to build a community. So yeah, maybe we can actually network on the ideas there, see if we can't share some wisdom. Anyway, thanks, Paul.
Yep. and it's really hard for me to I mean, Strawn's contribution to my work, I've just so enjoyed him as a conversation partner. And I mean, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for him and his efforts. So, really my hat's off to him.
Yeah, maybe we'll
be very kind.
make a little spot for him here. We love him. Maybe make a little philosopher laureate or something. But there's I think there's an element to the community here that I'd love to see unfold where it is more easy and comfortable for us to maneuver through these various spots and various modes of thinking and try to learn from one another. And I would love to be able to see it one day where these people that we're learning to trust to give us their perspective on the world could move freely amongst the communities, and that like these kinds of conversations could happen spontaneously and be as profitable and as enriching as we could make them, because it truly is, I think, as you're saying, that collaborative effort. When you find somebody worthwhile to talk to, and when you find that they have something real and true to say about the world, it makes all the difference. So I guess I really appreciate what this is, what you do with regards to the work and sharing all this stuff. And I'd like to see it available to as many people as possible. So that's just not a question, but thanks, Paul.
Paul, I already asked. Oh, this is Nick, by the way. I already asked you this question on the Q&A in the Bridges of Meaning server, but I figured it would probably fit well in here, seeing as it was from your discussion with Vervaeke. At one point in your guys' conversation, John gives an argument for a pluralistic take on religion, to which you assented, and when you answered before, you said that there was actually a bit of a history of pluralistic thinking within your tradition. I was wondering if maybe you could go more into that, and in what sense that pluralism works and how it's kind of afforded within your worldview.
Yeah, I knew, as I said on the previous one, I knew when I said that, I thought, oh, this is going to get interesting in terms of, because the question of pluralism is obviously Christians follow a master that says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. That tends to narrow things for Christians. At the same time, I was thinking in my mind when I was answering the question about the work of Abraham Kuyper. Now, I grew up in the Christian Reformed Church, which is a small denomination that historically was founded by Dutch immigrants. And in fact, the pool of Dutch immigrants were abnormally drawn from kind of the lower class secessionist churches in the Netherlands that had two major secessions from the Dutch state church. At the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century, two dominant lights arose. Herman Bavinck, who was a theologian primarily, and Abram Kuyper, who was a kind of a polymath theologian. Abram Kuyper would go on to found what would become the Free University in the Netherlands, and free meaning not no tuition, but free meaning disconnected from the state church. He would eventually become prime minister of the nation and found some practices which some in my tradition called principled pluralism, where politically, in terms of that, politically that would bear fruit in what would be called pillarization, where Roman Catholics could have their pillar, Dutch Reformed could have their pillar, modernists could have their pillar, and the idea was that these communities could continue to grow and develop and hopefully be in conversation with each other. Now, Kuyper also had the distinction of also promoting what he would call the antithesis, which would very much emphasize that word of Jesus, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me, and bring that antithesis way down into theology into some very narrow ways. And so with Kuyper, you had this sort of both and, which both attempted to recognize the antithetical nature of reality, either or, but also began to appreciate and leave space for both and. And that's, even though in the United States, outside of, let's say, Dutch Reformed, and even some neo-evangelical circles who would recognize the name of Abram Kuyper, that has led to a posture in the Christian Reformed Church. The Christian Reformed Church, I think, in some ways, has really tried to hold both sides of this dialectic together, where, okay, we believe what Jesus says is true, and on the other hand, we understand that by virtue of, let's say, a Calvinist appreciation for total depravity, none of us see clearly. And what that means is that I get many more things wrong than I get right. I should afford that same generosity towards my neighbors and the people with whom I want to have conversation. So this sort of yields, in the American context, freedom of religion. And so I am not interested in burning John Vervaeke at the stake because he's a non-theist. I'm not interested in burning Sam at the stake because he's deficient in his Trinitarian views. That's Sam from The Bridges of Meaning. So let's continue to talk together and appreciate what we can about what other sides get right, and let's have this dialogos and learn from each other. And I think Jesus also bears witness to this in the way in which he promoted and pursued his goals. And my favorite example of that is the unauthorized exorcist, which I often liken Jordan Peterson to, where there's this guy running around delivering people from demons in Jesus' name. And the disciples want to enforce their intellectual property and say, Jesus, should we make him stop? And Jesus says, leave him alone. And so I think Christians should, on one hand, be the most secure in what they believe, but on the other hand, also the most generous. And that generosity flows out of the security. And my questions about other things that God allows and other ways that God works flows out of the security that I am in his hand. And so I think these things that feel some ways antithetical actually work together.
That's great. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, I like that. It reminds me a little bit of Chesterton's orthodoxy. He talks a lot about the paradoxes and how they actually kind of fit together. Hi, Paul. My name is Eric. I've been thinking a lot about what draws people to religion, and like what needs do they want filled from it. And I was talking to my dad this weekend. He was a Mormon missionary for 2 years, and so he talked to a lot of people about this, and he came up with these like 5 different reasons. I'm curious to hear your take on them. One of them is community. I think that one's talked about a lot. One of them is like the ritual, and then there's the kind of putting your trust in some authority. There's the kind of having a logical understanding of what the cosmos is and what our place is in it. And the 5th one was spirituality. And I'm also curious what your take is on my feeling that most mainstream Christians and religions in general don't really actually address the spirituality. They just mostly address the other aspects.
That's a great list. I just typed it, and I'm gonna keep it, and I'm gonna use it. I'm gonna rip that off. Pastors are thieves, and if you trot a really good idea out in front of one, he's gonna take it and run with it. So I hope you see that as the highest form of flattery for your father's idea.
Sure. Yeah, I'll pass it on. Thanks.
I think it's a great list, and I think, well, here's a so spirituality. That's going to be the topic of. I'm going to go into that quite a bit in the video that I hope to record this afternoon. What do we mean by spirit? Well, I think in some ways, one of the areas in which the word has not been fragmented and degraded is if we use it for an example like school spirit. We all understand that when you were in school, when you had class spirit, your own class had a spirit about it, that the teachers knew, oh, the class of 2018 is this way, the class of 2019 was that way. Individuals participated in that spirit. Nobody controlled that spirit. That spirit was subject to influence. And again, so much of Vervaeke's work I found helpful, this kind of opponent processing ideas. All of John's work is sort of this middle space between heaven and earth, let's say. And here I'm going to rip off and Christianize a bunch of John's work. And I'd find it nothing but flattering if he does the same thing to me. So spirituality has to do with the question, what makes the tree move when I can't see the wind? And Jesus uses this illustration in John 3, where nobody knows where the Spirit comes from and where the Spirit blows. We just sort of see its effects. Now, I think the LDS Church, a part of the reason it's been enormously successful evangelistically is because it gets a bunch of these things right. Community, ritual, authority. Now, I'd have some disagreements with it on worldview, but spirituality has to do with what are the ways in which we influence and participate in the molding of this layer of reality that we can't fully control. We're subject to its influence. We have influence within it, but in that way, it's sort of a space. And I would say that churches do better or worse in this space. And I think the rise of Pentecostalism is a reaction, it's a reaction to the meaning crisis, it's a reaction to modernity. But if Luke from the Bridges of Meaning channel were here and the randos, it's also a reaction to, as I think Jonathan or John has noted many times, the imbalance of the propositional in terms of the 4 Ps as they're working in religion. And so spirituality, so you have God in Christianity and the Trinity, you have God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. The Spirit is often, for modernist theologians, the most difficult member of the Trinity to talk about. And whereas even with a theologian like John Calvin, who actually places a great deal of emphasis on the work of the Holy Spirit is vital in terms of John Calvin's. Many have noted that, well, Calvinist churches, at least until John Wimber and the Vineyard movement, Calvinist churches did really poorly at manifesting or appreciating the work of this Spirit. So I think as modernism continues to ebb, we're going to see probably continued growth in this area. And in terms of the LDS tradition, one of the things that's true about the LDS tradition is that it's a prophetic tradition in which, so a lot of what I know about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I've learned from this homeless man that sleeps outside my door, who there's a restraining order against, but not from me, but from the church building. So anyway, that's a long story. But he was a dyed-in-the-wool Mormon, and I've learned a ton from him about LDS Church and its history and the role that prophecy plays. And so in that sense, the LDS Church, in terms of that list of 5 things, is probably more open to spirituality than, let's say, my tradition of Calvinism.
Thanks. It's very interesting. Would you so just to clarify, do you associate spirituality with the participatory knowing, or with more of a balance between them all?
Oh, that's a really good question. Definitely participatory, definitely procedural, definitely perspectival. I think probably Wade. We get into a lot of trouble, and I've noticed this, and this has shaped a lot of my life, and I got this from my father, because my father was also very high in openness, but like me, born into a conservative Dutch Reformed tradition. And one of the things I learned from my father was, he always said, be careful about saying more than you know. Now, when he uses knowledge in that sense, traditionally we very much tie that to propositional. And in a modernist framework, when you listen to Sam Harris talk, he's very much propositional. And so I think in some ways, spirituality is this really nuanced dance between the other 3, and the propositional sort of has to mind its place when the other 3 are dancing in that way.
I like that. Thanks for your time.
Yep.
Hi. Hello, Paul.
Hi, who's talking? I'm looking for you.
It's Pedro.
Okay, Pedro. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you too. I was raised a Christian, but with time I kind of drifted away from it. And my question to you is, what is a way you would advise someone to rediscover Christianity? Are there readings you would advise and spiritual practices, something like that?
C.S. Lewis for me has. I'm taking notes now so I can, because I think this conversation is going well. I'll probably use it for my channel. C.S. Lewis for me has been sort of a mentor. And I think in many ways, C.S. Lewis walked the paths that we are walking almost 100 years before us, because he was raised in the Anglican Church. His mother died when he was 6. He, by the time he was a teenager, he was an angry atheist, and his running through Anglican boarding schools did not help him, but hurt him. And he, in many ways, then he went through World War I, survived it. I mean, he had one heck of a meaning crisis, and he had to find his way out of it. And so, as Jonathan Peugeot said, in terms of great storytellers in the West, at least in the English-speaking world, we've got Tolkien and Lewis. Tolkien never left the faith, although someone mentioned in the comment that his parents were Methodists. So that's interesting that, he went back towards a more sacramental tradition. Lewis tried to talk about mere Christianity, where he said, all of these, there's mere Christianity is this hallway, and each of the traditions are rooms off of it. I think for someone who, as you've described, and obviously if we had a longer conversation, we'd go further into the details, which is why I do these conversations on my channel, although I don't have enough time for it. I think you have to sort of follow your salience your salience landscape, and I think and because your mind you are working on stuff that your conscious self doesn't know about. And I think Peterson spoke eloquently about a lot of these dynamics. And you have to figure out, well, what ideas, what corners of my consciousness Congress need addressing? Now, I think finding a church, finding a member of the clergy or a small group or a friend or a mentor would be tremendously helpful in this. And I think mentors can be found dead or alive. And so C.S. Lewis for me is a mentor. Tolkien is a mentor. I think John Vervaeke in many ways is a mentor for me. He's taught me so many things. There are also been pastors in my life. My father, of course, one, but Dave Beelan, who was a pastor of mine in college and seminary, taught me a ton, Dante Venegas. And so I think look around for communities and groups and mentors who can, and I think it's follow your interests, because something is coming up on your salience landscape for a reason. Well, figure out what that reason is and pursue it. And but I think there's no substitute for finding a church, and I often frame that as training the elephant. So so kind of the Jonathan Haidt representation of the rider and the elephant. The rider up there is chatty, deals in propositional truths. The elephant is much more majors on the other P's, and what getting involved in terms of practice, regular disciplined practices, corporate worship, liturgy, prayer, studying of the Bible, all of these throughout the history of Christianity have been ways in which people we have this trite phrase, becoming a Christian. Well, I've never stopped becoming a Christian my whole life. And I don't suspect I will. I think that will go to the grave and maybe even beyond.
Thank you, Paul. I really appreciate your answer. John Vervaeke really is someone I find a mentor right now. And, I'm going to explore the works of C.S. Lewis definitely to start. And, well, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Paul. My name's Mark LeFevere. I am curious about, when I listen to John's talks, it seems like his core axiom is this idea that we can no longer live in the two worlds mythology. And I haven't listened to all your videos, unfortunately, but I don't know if you address that or like how you address that, because I think that's, if I were to have a criticism of John, that would be the core obvious one, that he starts from that premise and moves everything forward. So I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah. Well, two worlds mythology is a fairly low resolution term that maps onto a lot. And I am also suspicious that the two worlds mythology isn't going to be easily dispensed with. Now, I appreciate John's work in this area, and again, his point. I mean, the kind of the key difference between sort of the way our corner of the internet has been bisected between, let's say, theists and non-theists. The point that he makes about the vigor in which the modernist scientific achievements have undermined previous theologies and philosophies and spiritualities of Christianity. It's simply dishonest to underappreciate that truth because one feels timid or insecure about the sunk costs in their own religious tribe. Okay? But two worlds mythologies, perfect and the imperfect, antithetical versus binary versus analog. There are all these dualities, some of which so nicely map onto the two worlds mythology. And the two worlds mythology is simply so handy at migrating so many of these dualisms. I think it's just going to be so darn handy we can't get rid of it. It kind of like there was this somebody in the Bridges of Meaning server put this cartoon Morty and whatever, I'm not versed in these guys, but Marty and but anyway, it's this guy and this kid was using a level, and the guy's like, flat, you don't know flat, and then he goes and he does all this stuff to create a space in his floor that is perfectly flat, because gosh, that level, that water and a bubble and a couple of lines, you're going to judge level by that. Well, I think in many ways, Two Worlds mythology is the bubble and the water and the lines, and it's just too darn handy for regular people to use and to map so many things on. So I don't think it's going away, and and I don't think it's going away. It's like the level. It might be a low resolution instrument, but it's so darn handy, it's gonna keep finding usefulness.
Wow, that was a really good answer. Yeah, I sort of viewed it as the opposite of sneaking in the Jesus and sneaking in the science myself. But actually, I like your conception better of it as a tool that's already adaptive, and it just has a deeper meaning than what we're giving it. That sort of short thrift to call it, Two Worlds mythology. Thank you.
So, Paul, on that subject of the Holy Spirit, could you take a minute to take some of the fudginess out of how glory, grace, and the Holy Spirit are, how it's tangled up, and how maybe you can untangle that a little bit?
Well, first take everything I said about spirit and think again about school spirit. There's no way you're going to talk about school spirit without mountains of fudge. Is it the design of the building? Yes. Is it whether the school is in sunny California or cloud-covered Western Michigan or lowlands Europe? Yes. Is it whether someone who looks like a supermodel became a cheerleader and started dating a guy who would become Tom Brady? Yes. Does it has to do with that nerdy history teacher that somehow gives everybody an appetite for a subject that many people flee? Yes. There's so much to it that, and again, this is where I think cognitive science and the work of Jordan Peterson has been tremendously helpful to me. And if you look at the Jordan Peterson versus Sam Harris debates, where I think Sam Harris, the longer I think about those debates, was just completely exposed by those debates as not keeping up with the conversation and the struggle which we are seeing as human beings, which is that we are very small and the world is very big, and the kinds of tools we use, we need a lot of lossy compression schemes like JPEG, a lot of lossy compression schemes in order to take a world and a reality that is so rich. And now we're barking on the door of glory. Knocking on the door of glory, because part of what makes this world so rich is in fact and I think Vervaeke in some of his last videos about in Awakening from the Meaning Crisis touched on this, this space between the infinite and the finite. And in my last conversation with him, the moreness versus suchness. Right in that space, we begin to taste glory. But what glory is, I think in some ways, is where it all comes together when we're right over at that edge, staring into the infinite, and we get the sense of, wow. And so when the Tom Brady and the supermodel hook up, there's like, There's something there. We all envy and hate them, perhaps, and maybe they're jerks, but there's something there. And when the history teacher nerd somehow teaches history in such a way that people come out of their class wanting more, and the beautiful thing about history is that we keep making more of it. Well, there's, glory is in a sense where the moreness and the suchness meet, and we get an inkling of the combinatorial explosiveness. Okay? So here we have the Holy Spirit, which is something we're not going to reduce anytime soon. So it's going to be worlds of fudginess. And we have glory, which is where moreness and suchness meet. And, why is glory always connected with light? Well, what is light? Light is when all of, we use a prism to refract light and see its components. Well, white light is when all of the components are there. And they're all there integrated and harmoniously. And we get a sense with light that it's overwhelming to us because our eyes can only take so much of it and our being can only take so much of it. So now we have glory. Now we have the Holy Spirit. And now you want to talk about grace. Well, grace is in some ways the space where tiny creatures can taste glory and not have it overwhelm us. And Christianity has worked this in lots of different ways, but the word grace encompasses the moreness and the suchness to you. And that's where, let's say, now I'll do some riffing on John Calvin's theology. For John Calvin, the Holy Spirit was the applier, and grace was that which was applied so that glory can be seen and tasted. And what that does in us is instill within us a motivation and a crisis. Because what glory does is, on one hand, gosh, I want more. On the other hand, oh, I can't take it. And if you go back and you, I think it was it Charles Finney? Or what's the conservative school in? But anyway, he was a Christian who Christians every now and then, and I'm not going to talk about others because I don't know, and I'll use the Jordan Peterson move. I know Christianity, okay, and there are moments when Christians are, in a sense, visited by God, and Pascal had this, and after he died, they found sewn in one of his favorite pieces of clothing this thing about fire, and it was Moody. I think it was Dwight Moody. It was Moody or Finney who had this experience once where God came upon him, and as so often happens with this, people say, "Lord, if you don't let off of me, you'll destroy me." Well, that's sort of when the Holy Spirit and glory and grace is in some ways the eyedropper that administers the exact right amount of the conjunction of moreness and suchness to us, so that it leads us on a path where we're going to go further up and further in.
Hey, Paul, it's Jacob stalking you again. I wanted to ask you specifically regarding the religion that's not a religion. I think most people would say that central to religion is the idea of God. What does the God idea add to all the religions, non-theistic philosophies that we've been trying to find meaning in?
Ooh. And one of the things that over these last 3 years that I've learned a lot about has been, and really what was exposed in my theological and philosophical deficiencies was, what do we mean by this little 3-letter word God that the Jewish tradition quite rightly warned us against taking lightly. I sort of like what I said about the two worlds mythology. I think the same way about the God idea. It's just too darn handy. And if there's one, and John and I have talked about this, and John has mentioned it, as a pastor who now is third generation practitioner in the meaning crisis is a very old thing. I think it comes in waves. So third generation practitioner in working on the front lines of the meaning crisis, I think the idea of God is simply too useful and scalable an idea that it's simply not going to be dispensed with. Philosophers with their big brains and careful distinctions can do all kinds of things of trying to describe it or avoid it or imagine the absence of it. But I think what we're seeing in real time is that philosophers are only a small segment of God's garden of human beings. And if you're actually going to religions, for as long as we've known human civilizations, have been addressing, have been helping people. And so, and yes, there are some Eastern traditions where God isn't, well, there's non-God. And I think even the distinction between atheism and non-theism demonstrates it's just too strong of an idea. It's not going anywhere. And that's, again, part of the reason, the scalability issue, why I'm convinced that Chesterton, with his 7 deaths of, I should memorize that title of that chapter, 7 Deaths of the Faith. I think he's right. There's a reason, when I was reading, I started looking at Plato's Republic because I was reading The Divine Conspiracy, Dallas Willard's book. Dallas Willard was a professor of philosophy at University of Southern California, and he was making some connections between Plato and the Sermon on the Mount. So I wanted to look at Plato's Republic in the Greek, and so I bought it. And then I began to notice that Plato had Socrates talk about the gods and talk about God. And it's like, what does Plato mean when he uses God singular? What did Plato mean when contemporary editors would rightly use gods with a lowercase g and God with a capital G? It ain't going away. And I think so. I'm comfortable with my career choice.
Paul, no, we've gone an hour. I want to be respectful of your time. Are you okay to keep on going, or?
I'm okay to keep on going. Anybody who watches my channel knows, I can sit for a while and talk.
Sure, great. Well, we'll have you as long as you want to be here.
Well, I'm going to dip out at noon. I'll tell you that. So
that's an hour from now in your.
Yes. Yep.
Yes.
I've got another hour.
Okay, great. Who has a question?
You're breaking up. I can't hear you. You could type it in the chat too, in the event listening party text. You can type your question there if you've got problems with your mic.
All right. Well, Golden is trying to fix that. He's typing, so someone else can go. Don't be shy.
Maybe we don't have 2 hours worth of questions. That's okay too.
My mic might be noisy, but you talked about sin as a feature versus a bug. When you think about these religions without religion, does it strike you they're trying to address human iniquity or dissonance as a bug or a feature?
Well, that's a really good question. See, there's a reason pastors don't do these question and answers, because you ask us really hard questions that can get us in trouble. I think in Christianity, ultimately, it is God that deals with sin. And sin is both transgression, which is like rebellion, and can sometimes be missing the mark, which is, perhaps not so willful, failing to achieve the potential that God gave us and desires for us. The line between those two things is obviously a normative line. Now, one of the things I'm deeply indebted to Dr. Jim, the cardiologist from Idaho, was introducing me to Wilfrid Sellers and Daniel Bonavac's video, where he lays out the difference between the manifest and the scientific image. The difference between the manifest and the scientific image in some ways maps onto this question, because the difference between them is normativity. Science can tell you what is. The manifest image says what should be. And this weird space of, this is going to get Strawn so excited, this weird space of potential and not meeting up with one's potential, it's not quite clear where to map that onto in the manifest versus scientific image framework. And whenever you have items like this that can't be easily mapped onto them, they cause dissonance. And so a religion that's not a religion is a really clever way of trying to get at something. Well, what are we trying to get at? And now, over my videos over the last few weeks and couple of months, I've been really working on this question of religiosity. And so when John Vervaeke says an ecology of practice, well, a religious-y word for that is ritual. And when we talk about community, a religious-y word for that is church. And so, okay, so we're trying to create something that will not have the observed deficiencies and limitations of the items that are already on the spirituality market. And so, in this way, whereas someone might come to me and say, "Oh, Paul, you shouldn't be down for John's work with this religion that's not a religion." No, because I understand the good faith in which John is practicing, and I think that what John learns when John addresses the deficiencies that he's seen in religion. Well, look at my first video with John. Who is John Vervaeke, and what is he, and what is the meaning crisis? Why do I, when I interview people, want to take some time to dig into their story? Because the moreness and the suchness of John Vervaeke come together in this project. And the crazy thing about human beings is very little is wasted. And if you expand this into Christian ecclesiology, I might argue that perhaps theoretically, oh gosh, now I've just triggered universalism. Very little is wasted in terms of, John's story and the reasons why he looks at religion and says, oh, I can't go there, I can't do that, there's too much there, and I want to go out and I want to get it, I want to do it better. That, when you listen to John and when you look at his passion, this is part of the things I love about him. He wants glory. He wants grace. He wants it all. And he wants to start tasting it now. Amen. That drive is something that I, as a Christian minister, appreciate in a world of settling for crap. And so when I look at John Vervaeke and I look at church planters, I don't see a lot of difference, because church planters go out there and say, I've seen problems in the church and it's been a disaster. I'm going to finally get church right. And they all fail. Every one of them. John Vervaeke says, I want a religion that isn't a religion. I want to go out there and do things where all of my experience with Christianity growing up and Paul Tillich and the mainline church and Buddhism, nobody got it exactly right. And well, here's the thing about John. He's humble, he's collaborative, he's community oriented. And so I look at this and say, I'm coming with you, John. Me too, because sin is a feature and a bug. It's a feature of the church that has drawn people like John Vervaeke and church planters like one I've had on my channel, Eric Dirksen, and says, all right, I'm limited by a tradition, but that limitation is vital, because I know I'm small and can't see a whole lot. And so, as Chesterton said, I'm going to give my dead ancestors a seat at the table. So if you follow Eric Dirksen on Twitter, he's always tweeting Augustine or Chrysostom or Calvin or, because, or church fathers, because he knows that there's these guys were way smarter than we were, and they knew way more than we know, and gosh, I should listen to them. But then he's also paying attention to what's going on in the culture. And I'm doing that with John. John's read books I'll never read. John's done things and dabbled with things and practiced things I'll never practice. I don't have enough life in me to duplicate all of the years that John has. And so get this. By listening to John, I can benefit from his sin. Oh, am I saying John's a sinner? Yes, me too. I'm probably a worst one. I would think most definitely, because I know my sins, I don't know his. But here's the thing. Sins of both John's transgressions, as I would call them, but also his failure to reach his potential. And John is an honest guy that I don't think I'm saying anything that would offend him. And again, this is part of the reason I love him as a conversation partner, because now John is so much more gracious than I am, and he would be couching these things in all of his, all of the great ways that he does that. And I'm an East Coast boy from New Jersey, and I just boldly rush in and fearfully offend people. And it's probably why I'm such a bad pastor and bad YouTuber. But I can learn from John's sins if I listen to him. Both these categories of sin. And I can learn from John's religion that isn't a religion if I listen to him in humility, because my practice of Christianity is full of sin, both the lack of potential and the rebellion that is in me. So I don't know if I've answered your question.
That was a great answer. Golden Tip Pen has posted his question. He writes,
Okay.
"Hi Paul, I recently just watched a podcast in where you mentioned your concepts of God 1 and God 2. A question that I have is, how do you characterize and differentiate particular intelligent design, such as natural selection and central pattern generators, versus more holistic, phenomenological, gestalt-esque components of God, such as the salience landscape and relevance realization? Does the difference lie in a matter of scale?"
Well, you're pounding on the door of the video I hope to make this afternoon. Because, and this again is where my conversations with John are so fruitful, because John, in a sense, and I are working at the problem from two different ends. I'm coming to it from Christianity, where, as Jonathan Peugeot says, it's persons all the way up. And John Vervaeke is coming at it from cognitive science, which, as a scientific discipline, and again, if there's one thing I've learned from John, it's discipline in language and terminology. Don't equivocate. I can hear him say it, how many times from Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. Okay, so, but he's coming at it from the scientific discipline, the spirit of geometry, in which he's practicing a lot of finesse, and saying, okay, how deeply can we penetrate this conundrum? Boy, well, here's the thing. If there's anything we've learned about the universe, it's a lot deeper than we've gone so far. We don't know where the bottom is. In my putting together the PowerPoint for my video this afternoon, I bumped into a video that I made. See, I don't even have time to remember all my old videos. But the thumbnail that I made, which I searched for, asks this question. This is a video I did in 2019. Is personhood detection merely the perceptual limit of our pattern recognition? I'm going to read that again. Is personhood detection merely the perceptual limit of our pattern recognition? So part of what I saw in the God number 1, God number 2 moment between Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris was God number 2 is clearly personal. And Sam is really, I think, offended at the notion that the universe would be owned by a person. I think that's at the heart of atheism. There's an offense in there that I think it was that Eric Weinstein, trying to get my names right, Eric Weinstein, I think perfectly encapsulated when he said, it's better if there is no God, because if there is a God, you have to worry about what's on his mind. Boy, that's a genius statement. And with all due respect to the atheists and the non-theists, well, gosh, the extent to which, if there's a mind, a person behind, or three, behind the universe, the lengths to which these people will go to create involves millions of years of the death of plants and animals, and human history involves immense amounts of suffering. Well, yeah, that's a big question. Now Christians have known this question for a very long time and weighed it. And the answer they always come up with is sort of, I don't know, and I don't know that I can do the math. And that's where it gets into this line that I think you nicely laid out. How do you characterize and differentiate particular intelligent design? And so John Vervaeke and his autopoetic, and I don't have all those words really memorized yet, all of that stuff, which is sort of going on its own, versus persons which have consciousness, which is sort of this really amazing field in which the world is too big for me to know, but things can come into my salience hierarchy, and I can, in real time and over time, respond to them in productive ways that pursues different ends and goals that I possess and choose. Yeah. So it's a great question. I don't know if I can answer it, but that's my best shot at it.
That's great. And Golden Tip Pen responded, "Wow, that's a great answer." So he appreciated it. Any other questions?
I have one that's kind of focused more on the nature of these discords. You know, kind of partaking in a number of these that have popped up. You know, Eric Weinstein's comes to mind. This one, obviously, the Bridges of Meaning server. It's hard not to notice that the Bridges of Meaning server has been around for a good while and has been able to handle quite well a high level of disagreement while still largely staying focused on you know, a healthy form of discussion. And it seems to me that part of that is from people modeling your behavior on how to have these types of discussions that you know you've had with all these random people. And in many ways, I've seen John actually replicate that to some degree with his Voices with Vervaeke series, where he kind of opens up communication to people that he wouldn't necessarily agree with all the way. And I was wondering if you might speak to kind of where you find that form of discussion and affordance, and how you think it impacts the types of conversations that are able to occur in these little groups that have formed around these various personalities.
I come... So before I made videos about Jordan Peterson, and it was just the Freddie and Paul show on my channel, I was deeply concerned about my own Christian denomination, my own community. So, you know, some of this goes back to immigration. So one side of my family took care of cows and slipped across the Atlantic when Mr. Whiten, who was a industrial magnate in a little town in Massachusetts, all his cows died in a cow flu pandemic, and the best cows in the world were from the Netherlands, and the people who were bringing the cows over were smart enough to know that, hey, there's a real spirit of finesse surrounding all of these cows. And the people, if you want the best caretakers for the cows, get the cow caretakers who have been developing the best cows in the world. So a bunch of Frisians came over with the cows to Whitensville, Massachusetts. That's my mother's side of the family. My father's side of the family were Jews, and they smuggled over to Western Michigan, and I don't know what happened, but somehow started assimilating with the Dutch cows farmers. But my great grandfather was a house painter, and an artist, so he started doing that. Well, so the Christian Reformed Church has been my community over time. I'm the third generation of of clergy in my family. And the Christian Reformed Church, I think it was Martin E. Marty, who was a churchman who once offered comment on the Christian Reformed Church, and he said, "It's not a denomination, it's an extended family." And that's true. Less true every decade, but true. And I watched my denomination heading for a fight. Growing up from the 70s, 80s, 90s, aughts, watched 30 years, I watched my denomination fight over whether or not women could serve as deacons, elders, and ministers in our denomination. It was a big fight, and obviously a fight that goes far beyond my denomination. And that fight cost the denomination dearly. A generation before, when my grandmother was a little girl, her sister married the daughter of one of the guiding lights and megachurch planters of the Christian Reformed Church at the beginning of the 20th century, Herman Hoeksema, who eventually caused a schism over this question of the antithesis and common grace, which answers your first question, Nick, about pluralism. And my grandmother's sister was married to the son of Herman Hoeksema, Homer, and a family fight became a church fight. And my great aunt, her name was Marie, was shunned because everybody suspected wrongly that she leaked the family secret that they were going to put old Herman in a home instead of taking care of him at home. And the little sect of now secessionists from secessionists were offended that the family would make such a decision instead of carrying the weight of caring for the old, increasingly disabled man at home. And that wound was a family story that I heard that got passed on, and where dear old Saint Anne Marie once tried to visit her children at the Christian school and were turned away. And so I watched my denomination and I watched families split over what roles women could and couldn't have. And I'm watching my denomination on the verge of having another civil war over same-sex marriage and gays and all of this stuff. And I'm watching the march to war. And I'm troubled. Because however the war ends, and whoever gets to keep what, and wherever the boundaries lie, the wounded are going to be all over the battlefield of my church. And I believe that the founder of my church, not Abraham Kuyper, not Van Raalte, not John Calvin, not Augustine, but Jesus Christ himself, did not want his disciples killing each other over these ideas. And so that, over generations, what is a person? Not Paul the Apostate, Jacob. That has been built into me. This person, whatever a person is, that has been built into me for centuries. My Jewish side, my Frisian side, and look at those two pieces of me. I can think of no two groups more stubborn than Jews and Frisians. You know, the Frisians came over with the cows because, you know, in cows, Frisians met their match in terms of stubbornness. So if some of this spirit is in me, that on one hand, on one side wants the moreness and the suchness. Oh, that came from Buddhism. Oh no, I can't use the term. Well, that's a great idea. And John has sort of, via the blessings of secularism, sanitized it a little bit. So now a Christian minister who likes picking other people's philosophical and theological pockets and butting into their conversations, I see this, I see John Vervaeke sporting this, and I say, I can use that. That can help me understand glory. And we just put this together this morning. Gosh, I want to talk to John Vervaeke. There's common grace in John Vervaeke. But the antithesis is still real, because the antithesis provides power for the systems as well. And so I think you said it really well, Nick. I my whole life long have yearned to see churches handle disagreement and yet not lose focus on antithetical things. So, I don't think you could have honored me in any greater way, Nick, than the way that you framed this question, because in many ways, it's the work of my life. I want to, on one hand, I want us to be honest and truthful about our sin. And we can't be honest and truthful about all our sin. It's not appropriate. It's the way the world works. But sin is a function of the antithesis. But my Calvinist upbringing says we're all sinners. And in some ways, I'm going to have more to answer for on Judgment Day than John Vervaeke, because I'm a Christian teacher and I have to own that. But I want a community where people who, for one reason or another, say, I can't get on board with the God thing. Okay. I still want to talk to you. Jesus, who founded my religion, says, love your neighbor up to and including your rivals and your enemies. Now, Christians have not done well with that. Well, they're not alone in that. But that's the standard Jesus calls me to. And so what does that look like in the midst of this meaning crisis, in the midst of our little corner of the internet, after listening to Jordan Peterson and watching lights go on because of that? That means going into spaces like this and creating spaces like this where Sam can come in and say, I'm not so sure about that Trinity thing. Boy, I think it was harder for people welcoming Sam than welcoming atheists. But we're learning that. And we're talking to Sam. And we're learning things from Sam. And Sam's learning things from us. And we're not going to burn him at the stake. There's a little spoiler alert. So, yeah, you come in. If you become my friend, you run the risk of becoming an illustration. And poor Nick knows that too, for cult Nick. But, I've got a little bit of Donald Trump in me too, because, he started as a Frisian Dutch Reformed guy too. So there we have it. Paul Vanderklay and Donald Trump, part of the same family. Boy, that'll make some people upset.
Boy, this recording just got a whole lot spicier. Well said, Paul, though. Very well said. I think that essentially this feeling that can come from trust and community is what so many people are missing, and whatever routes and avenues we can come to approach that and remember it and make it sacred in that real sense, I think is what we have to enact, right? To feel a calling to it and not be afraid to approach. And for that I greatly appreciate all this motions that people are making here, not just yourself, but all the wonderful people that gather in these spots and say these words. It's wonderful.
Any other questions?
See, the reason I leave 2 hours is because I give long answers.
Well, we definitely appreciate them. So, and appreciate your time. This has been great. I'll give a going once, going twice. Last call. Well, thank you, Paul. This has been fantastic. I think I'm going to have to listen to this over again. Yeah, you've given so much there to listen to, and I love the way you made all your comments relevant to this community as well. And I know there's a lot of overlap between this community and your community, but you can certainly see how John Vervaeke has influenced your thinking, and I think probably vice versa. And that's
And
certainly
that's the
come out.
beauty of this, right? That's what we're looking for. And again, John has said that so well. He says, you have a conversation, both of us leave it stronger. And I think that's, Petersonian too, you know. So no, it's been wonderful. So really appreciate the opportunity. We can do it again sometime. I posted in the event listening party. I took notes as we went. That helps me when I'm talking. And so yeah, I'll probably put this on my channel. I think this went very, very well.
Well, that's great. And so thank you so much, Paul, for being here. Thank you, everyone here. I'm continually impressed by the level and caliber of the questions of this community, and this is great. This is what we want to see. Tomorrow at 5 Eastern, we've got Greg Enriquez, who's going to come by to chat with us following his Voices with Vervaeke. So I think that'll be a really interesting talk. I hope you all come. Also, Monday to Friday at 9:30 Eastern, we have a listening party for John's meditation classes and his meditation sessions, and then we type. We talk afterwards about our experience, and we might do some Lectio Divina. That's what's being focused on for this week. So hopefully you all will join. And again, thank you everyone for coming, and we'll close off the recording. And again, thank you, Paul. That was fantastic.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Paul.